Food is many things to many people. What exactly that thing is says a lot about the group of people as a whole. What we eat is a huge part of who we are, who we've been, and what we experience as we encounter the new. In this series, I will discuss the ways that many denizens of the Forgotten Realms break bread. The study of culinary ethnography is a holistic one, analyzing what is consumed by a group while considering the geographic, historical, and ecological reasons for their developed food culture. The goal is to understand not just what a group is eating, but why. This is by no means a rule book, as if I am some sort of dictator of what is and isn't proper for a member of a race to do in the kitchen. Rather, it's a collection of observances in regards to commonalities and trends among members of the same lineage. While my own experience is obviously limited, and there are plenty of individuals that I have yet to dine with and learn about, I would like to offer up what I have learned so far. Many lineages use food as a way to celebrate the good times, and what race more so than the Dwarves? Anyone who has been in a busy tavern in a cosmopolitan city has probably seen some Dwarven revelers drinking friend and foe alike under the table. However, a penchant for alcohol is not all that this folk has for a food culture. Let's look at their diet as a whole. I understand that the term Dwarves has many different meanings depending on the area you're from, and this does not encapsulate every single diaspora of Dwarves. I will today be discussing some of the cultures of Dwarves I personally have learned about the most, those who call the mountains and hillsides their homes. Dwarven foodstuff is primarily separated into two groups, that from above and that from below. That from above includes everything that's grown above ground, or outside of the mountain or hill the Dwarves call home. These include most grazing animals and any of the fruits, vegetables, or grains the Dwarves might cultivate. That from below is all items that are cultivated below the Earth's surface. These include some more hardy root vegetables, certain lichens and moss, many types of fungus, and many subterranean creatures that some Dwarven clans cultivate, such as spiders or lizards. We will begin with an in-depth look at the above before moving on to the below. While many adventurers' depictions of dwarves have them as stalwart denizens of the mountain, never leaving the crags and spires that they call home, many Dwarven clans spend a fair amount of time in the sunlight. This time is often spent allowing livestock to graze among whatever greenery is available on the hills and mountainsides. Cattle, goats, and sheep are very commonly seen as grazing animals. However, unlike other lineages that rely on grazing animals, these animals never really venture too far from home. Most are let out in the mornings and corralled back inside by nightfall. Instead of solely relying on grazing, some clans also have animals in pens that are raised on feed. This includes the aforementioned cattle, goats, and sheep, along with pigs and fowl. Dwarves also use the land outside of their strongholds for agriculture, primarily including vegetables and grains. Root vegetables play a large role in many Dwarven diets due to their nutritional density and ability to survive in some of the less hospitable growing conditions near Dwarven strongholds. Potatoes, carrots, and turnips are a mainstay in most Dwarven clans, and can easily evoke a nostalgic feeling for dwarves eating at a tavern far from home. Another popular starch is the gold sponge, a large fruit that grows on long, spindly vines and has a deep yellow color and very tender flesh. Cabbage can also be found in many Dwarven recipes for its hardiness and ability to be stored deep underground. When it comes to grains, wheat, barley, and rye are by far the most common. These grains are cultivated and harvested close to the stronghold and then kept in the underground quarries. Many Dwarven clans that live near other peoples will trade with them to supplement their grain production, if not completely rely on them for it. Dwarves glean many treasures from the earth, and this is not only speaking of the gems and ores. Many Dwarven clans are well versed in the types of fungus that can be found in their hills and mountains. Dwarven mushroom picking is an old art in some clans, with an apprentice requiring at least a century of tutelage before they're trusted. Old mushroom foraging masters can tell apart mushrooms that might seem completely identical to an outsider. The difference between the two being how alive you'll be after choosing one to add to your soup. Some clans even have been known to cultivate types of fungus, managing large-scale cave mushroom farms that can rival the massive wheat fields of humans. For those clans that do more foraging, lichen and moss are also a good source of nutrients in the caves. Traditional agriculture doesn't just occur above the surface. Many Dwarven holds have complex diamante-lined tunnels, which filter light from the surface into large growing chambers. This is far from the benefits of a field in the full summer sun, but many vegetables, such as tubers, can still grow well with this amount of light. Potatoes, carrots, and turnips are a constant among most dwarven clans after all. The aforementioned gold sponge also thrives in these farming caverns, and large arches are often constructed above the growing fields for the cultivation of lichen, mosses, and gold sponge. One of the most dazzling growing caverns I've ever seen was when I dined with the Tolkur Dwarves in Mount Calder. Calder is a long dormant volcano, and the Tolkur Dwarves have created large step terraces in the volcanic soil, going up hundreds of feet. The walls of the cavern are all lined with crystals to refract the light that comes through tunnels from the surface. At day, the cavern is blindingly bright, and at night, when there's a moon in the sky, the cavern twinkles gently, allowing the dwarves to work the terraces. These dwarves also undertook a massive irrigation project, routing runoff from the mountain snow into large aquifers in the mountain, which are then gradually emptied to run through canals in the terrace farm. It's truly a spectacle to behold, and an architectural marvel that could only be pulled off by dwarves. While dwarves eat a lot of vegetables, they are far from herbivores, and just as meat can be found above, so can it below. The Roth is a quadrupedal creature similar to an auroch or bison. While there are species of Roth that live above the surface, there are also deep Roth which are adapted to life below. They subsist off a diet of myconid strands, little fungal patches that look like spider webs. This is supplemented with insects and other small creatures that are found while foraging for fungus. In some clans, it is common for dwarven miners to bring along a Roth with them while they work. The Roth can serve as a pack animal, helping to haul the dwarf's equipment and whatever ore they collect. While the dwarf mines, the Roth forages along the mine shaft and can warn of any danger that the dwarf would otherwise be ambushed by. Dwarves consume some less cooperative creatures as well. Lizards, spiders, and beetles are all commonly eaten, and some clans go so far as to selectively breed them just as other lineages have done with cattle and livestock. While far from domesticated, many of these creatures have become reliable sources of protein and nutrients that can be completely managed without leaving the mountain. Lizard meat from the dwarves in Mount Corcoran is a particular treat, as rich and fatty as good quality beef, but with an aged and not unpleasantly dank flavor, like that of exotic mushrooms. Their spider legs are also incredibly meaty, cracking open almost like those of a crab. Some creatures aren't managed by dwarves, but are rarely encountered while they work in the mines. When it comes to the creatures of the caverns, this is where diet differs most clan by clan. Some clans have underground rivers and lakes offering beasts like fish and eels. Some rely on more terranean creatures such as giant bats and rats. It's completely determined by what lives in the mountain. The prime example of a great find in the caverns is the cave fisher. I speak more about this true gem of the underground in my other work, Fantastic Beasts and How to Eat Them, but I will mention the large boon that a cave fisher can be to dwarves when it's found in the wild and captured. In addition to the strongly flavored meat, the blood is used for the creation of certain highly sought-after dwarven spirits. No other lineage has truly learned how to ferment cave fisher alcohol like the dwarves, though plenty of others have tried. Some rambunctious dwarves even drink the blood straight, giving a more psychedelic effect. The eggs were also used for their mind-altering properties, which some dwarven clerics use in rituals to have visions or tell fortunes. These psychedelics could be damaging and even fatal for lineages with less hardy constitutions, so be careful what you partake in when reveling with dwarves. While meat plays a large role in the dwarven diets, the actual culinary methods of preparation are very simple. The vast majority of all meat consumed is either roasted or braised. Roasted meat is very lightly seasoned, usually just coated in salt and maybe some other spices before being turned slowly over a fire until perfectly cooked through. Thicker, more muscled cuts are commonly broken down in braises and soups. Shoulder meat can be seen simmering away in a pot with a dark stout and aromatics, or in a hearty stew. These two methods hold true for a large majority of dwarven consumption, but there are some notable exceptions. The first of which is the important place of sausages. Many lineages have types of sausages, but where most other peoples add large amounts of spices or seasonings to the ground offal, dwarven sausages are characterized by proportionally large amounts of non-meat. The offal is instead matched almost evenly by chopped up mushrooms before being stuffed in casings. Some deep dwarves don't even use animal intestines for casings, instead relying on webs of thick mycelium, which are then removed before cooking. Another worthwhile exception is the practice of coal burying, when it comes to meat of creatures with exoskeletons. Legs of giant spider and cave fisher alike are commonly buried in hot coals to cook through. They are then retrieved, and the thick carapace is cracked to reveal incredibly juicy and tender meat. Vegetables do much of the heavy lifting in Dwarven diets, and play plenty of roles on a Dwarven dinner table. The first and foremost is in thick, hearty stews. Root vegetables make up the backbone of almost any Dwarven stew, being cooked down for hours with the offal and bones that are harvested from other meat dishes. Most Dwarven stews are roux-based, relying on some sort of grain flour being mixed with fat for thickening and as a flavor base. These stews are an important part of the meal plan for providing dense nutrients and calories, and for being an incredibly versatile vehicle for utilizing leftovers. Did you have cavefish the night before? Place the shell in some water that morning to cook out. By noon, you'll have a nice broth. Some of this broth will be used in lunch, and the rest will be combined with thick roux and some vegetables to cook off until dinner, yielding a very hearty soup or stew. Some vegetables avoid the pot altogether, and are instead roasted or caramelized to perfection. These are placed on the same spits that meat is turned on. It's common for high sugar content vegetables such as carrots and onions to be cooked this way. Garlic is another popular roast vegetable on dinner tables, commonly eaten all on its own as a side to other dishes after being roasted to an almost jelly-like consistency. One treat that's worth mentioning is coal-buried sweet tubers. Certain root vegetables like sweet potatoes work perfectly with this method, being buried in the coals until their skin is completely black. Afterwards, the skin is removed, and it reveals an incredibly sweet and tender flesh that's just an absolute joy to consume on a cold winter's day. Some dwarves who go to big cities decide to use this time-honored tradition to make some coin, lobbing around wheelbarrows with smoldering coals and root veggies, selling them to anyone who's interested. Breads come in many forms in the various Dwarven kingdoms, though baking has never been a widely explored profession among dwarves, as most are happy to settle with a simple country loaf. Some clans have explored the possibility of basic pies and other pastries, but nothing has come close to the popularity of crusty loaves of bread in Dwarven strongholds. The matter of discussion is the myriad of different flours that are employed by different clans. Walking into dinner at a Dwarven hold will definitely include thick slabs of bread to soak up your stew, but that bread could be made of wheat, barley, rye, or even more exotic sources. Dwarves that rely on more subterranean food sources commonly cultivate large amounts of moss and lichen. These plants and fungi are then dried out and ground into flours. They function in a very similar manner to grain, and can be used for roux, thickening, and baking. These breads vary in color, from deep greens to alabaster whites, interestingly not taking on much color through the baking process. They are very light in flavor, being used completely as a receptacle for the stew and meat drippings that they're used to sop up. Many dwarves live in areas where harvest seasons are small or unpredictable and inhospitable. This has developed an extensive food culture based around preservation, and for most clans this includes a large portion of pickled goods. Each growing season, over half of the harvest is put through a week-long communal jarring process. The vegetables are first cleaned thoroughly, then sliced into thin strips and salted. This salting removes excess liquid, an important step before the vegetables are rinsed off and drained. They are then stuffed into earthenware pots and filled with water. The pots are left out in the open for a week before being buried in the ground. Each Dwarven family is entitled to a portion of the clan's jars throughout the tough seasons. Once a family runs out of pickles, they simply go to the storage space and retrieve another jar. The jars open with a satisfying, high-pitched bubbling sound, and yield perfectly sour and earth-preserved vegetables that are then used to complement a large range of meals. Dwarves are known far and wide both for their mastery and their love of hard drinks. The image of a dwarf in a tavern with a pint of ale in one hand and their other arm around a comrade is a sight seen in plenty of cities. However, let's take it back a bit and start at the source of all these drinks, water itself. Water is an extremely important part of Dwarven consumption. Each Dwarven hold has its own spring of water which it builds a society around. The spring is the lifeblood of the clan. In many Dwarven cultures, it's considered nothing less than holy. Tampering with the spring is tantamount to treason, and is punished as such, often with death. The taste of the water of each spring is completely unique, influenced by the minerals and the rocks that it flows through. Dwarves are particularly attuned to these minuscule differences. Some dwarves even claim that they can tell apart members of different clans just based on the smell of the spring water on their breath. This water is an integral piece of the puzzle of fermentation and distillation. Many cities and other civilizations struggle from inconsistency between batches of spirits. Dwarven brewers, however, are extremely specific about the identical conditions necessary for each batch of booze, from the details of the water to the same shape of the distilling vessels. Some Dwarven brewers are so particular about these details that when switching out distillation drums, they will hammer the new vessel to have the same dents and creases that the old one had developed. These traditions have been passed down for millennia in some of the older holds, and those clans have some of the best alcohol to show for it. It's only fitting to segue into our discussion of liquid courage, so let's work our way up the potency of these drinks, starting with the drink most dwarves start the night with, ale. Dwarven ales are rather light, and the primary difference in flavor between a Dwarven ale and an ale brewed elsewhere is the aforementioned spring water. The flavor of the spring water cuts through the drink and accentuates the hoppy flavor. Water and hops are the two major factors of the flavor of the ale, and both vary completely in each Dwarven hold. The same type of hops can be used by two different clans, but the mineral levels of the spring water can still create two different drinks. Although Dwarven clans don't often intersect, when they do, one of the most important parts of diplomacy is the act of partaking in each other's ale. While a dwarf can appreciate the flavors and nuances of ale from another location, they will undoubtedly remark on the inferiority of the drink in comparison to that of their home. This isn't rude, it's to be expected. In fact, few dwarves would trust a dwarf that admits to the superiority of another clan's ale. If they're lying about that, what else are they hiding? Next on the list is ciders and fruit wines. Fruit wines are much less ubiquitous than ales among secluded mountainous Dwarven clans. These are more common among hill dwarves, and those clans that have become more active in trade with other peoples. Fruits are not commonly a large part of the Dwarven diet. Many dwarves also find fruits to be a little too sweet for their palate. However, after fermentation, these fruits become a much more appetizing drink. Few clans have become as adept at the brewing of ciders as they have of other drinks, and trying new ones is a piece of wonder for any dwarf that finds themselves on an adventure to a faraway land. Some of the most popular fruit wines are those of apples, grapes, and sometimes gold sponge. Mushroom wines, on the other hand, are much more commonly seen in mountainous Dwarven holds. These drinks are a wonder to behold, with a light amber color that refracts the flicker of the flame at the dinner table. These wines utilize the leftover aged brewing yeast from ales and stouts to impart a deep complexity to the already exotic flavors of the mushrooms that dwarves cultivate. The taste is wonderfully nutty, with a distinct funkiness that's dependent on the type of mushrooms found in the Dwarven hold. One of the greatest joys of a Dwarven brewer is finding rare mushrooms deep in the caverns to ferment. Some of these rare mushroom wines are given as important gifts or tribute, and only consumed on important occasions such as the signing of treaties between different clans or diplomatic marriages. One such bottle of alabaster oyster mushroom wine was brewed by the Thorig dwarves of Mount Alatola 500 years ago as a gift to the nearby halfling village of Filch, as a token of peace and prosperity. As a true show of camaraderie, the bottle still sits in the halfling councilman's office today, a true feat of self-control for halflings. Next is stouts, the thick black ichor that dribbles out of dwarven casks. Dwarven stouts are far stronger than those in the other lands I visited. Their flavor is deep, dark, and rich, with notes such as the coffee beans of southern jungles and a smell like recently tanned leather. The light fragrance of hops found in ales is all but absent. As mentioned, these are powerful not just in flavor but also in alcohol content. The first few sips can be a kick in the face and a shock to the palate, but once you've adjusted to the intensity, they can go down a little too quickly, a mistake often made by first-time drinkers from other lands, so pace yourself. Finally, we have spirits. Dwarves are true masters of distillation. While good beers and wines can be found in many lands, the best spirits are consistently made by dwarves and those who learn from dwarves. Coincidentally, dwarves rarely impart these trade secrets to other lineages, so many humans who market their skills as dwarven taught are simply charlatans. As mentioned before, spring water is a vital factor in the creation of dwarven spirits. The long distillation process and aging time requires as close to identical conditions as possible. Just as a captain of a ship veering off course by a single degree, the longer the trip, the further from his target he'll be. This holds just as true for the creation of alcohol. The longer the process, the more a small difference can become apparent in the end product. These spirits can range widely from fortified wines to grain spirits. However, one name is synonymous with revelry and danger: firewater. In all technicality, firewater is simply an incredibly high-strength spirit. Each Dwarven hold has its own firewater, and this is simply the highest strength alcohol that they're able to distill consistently. Opinions of what defines a firewater is a subject of intense debate among different clans. Some swear it must be derived from grain, others believe that if it's not from mushrooms, it's just a strong spirit. Technicalities of techniques, ingredients, and conditions are all dependent on the factors that work best for an individual hold. While a dwarf will merely comment on the superiority of their clan's ale, discussing firewater will quickly drive dwarves to back up their words with action. This, however, may also be due to the fact that these discussions primarily occur when firewater is being drunk. Dwarven culinary culture is as complex and varied as each individual clan. To truly understand and appreciate it, you really have to visit a clan and spend some time seeing how they live their lives. Common trends among these different clans do emerge, and all of them link to simple, hearty meals that are best shared with a table full of family and friends. To dwarves, food is the capstone on a long, productive day, a celebration of hard work, family, and good fortune. If you find yourself lucky enough to have a seat at that table, I highly advise you to take advantage of the chance.